Hi there, I'm going to be talking in this video a bit about how we make decisions, particularly in the Uniting Church. I've been preaching a bit at my congregation on some topics that are to do with being part of the whole church, the broader church, and also particularly about the Uniting Church in Australia, what it means being part of the Uniting Church in Australia. So I haven't been following the lectionary for a little bit. Next Sunday we'll be back to the lectionary. But the readings that I've been thinking about when I've been preparing this sermon were 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10 to 15, and from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 18, verse 15 to 20. So feel free to pause this video and have a look at those and then start the video up again. In the news at the moment, we have stories about a leader who is attempting to dismantle democracy. There are a lot of things that the president has to work with the government to do, just like the prime minister has to work with the government in this country. But this newly elected president is taking his victory to mean that he and his friends can do whatever they want. And there are actually a lot of Christians supporting those efforts to dismantle democracy. There have also actually been Christians speaking out against what's happening. Lutherans and Baptists, Methodists, Mennonites have been challenging what he and his team are doing. The Episcopal Bishop of Washington, D.C. called for the president to show mercy and compassion to vulnerable people, and he took that as some kind of attack, as though she was being nasty to him. But the folks who won the presidential election have been saying that because they won, they can now do what they want without having to work with the government, to the point of dismantling the infrastructure that their society depends on. We've seen this before lots of times. A group decides that they need to take charge and that they have all the answers, that they are going to fix all the problems. They're going to take the country by force and make things right by force. That might be what the world's like, but in the church we're supposed to model a different way of living together. It's not supposed to be about the strongest or the loudest or the person with the biggest mob ruling. Paul says we should be woven together with the same mind and purpose, without divisions. We shouldn't be dividing ourselves into factions. He says to the ancient Corinthian church that they shouldn't be splitting themselves up based on who their preferred leader is. Often a simple solution to that division is to all follow one person, a strong leader with a loud voice, whether it's the minister or the chair of the church council or the bishop in churches that have bishops. In churches, we're often feeling like we need to have unity, like Paul is talking about, and so we all fall behind somebody with a strong voice. And this can create harmony of a sort, but it can mean that we don't hear from other voices who might have something to say, that's inspired by God's Spirit. I can remember being involved in a synod discussion, and we spent days of a meeting discussing something that was controversial, something that took days to come to an agreement on. We have these big meetings at the Box Hill Town Hall where we have representatives from all across Victoria and Tasmania who are trying to make decisions about things that matter for that whole area. We have that every year and a half, pretty much. But we ended up making a decision about this matter, but the same topic had to be revisited at the following meeting because other things had changed with the law. And so we needed to revisit it. I was in a group where we were listening to each other about how we felt about the matter so that we could then report back to the whole meeting. Because sometimes you only hear some voices if you talk in a small group. You're not going to hear it in a big meeting. So I was in a group where we were listening to how we felt about this issue, and in the group there was strong agreement being expressed, strong support for the decision to go forward. And so we could have just reported back to the whole meeting that our group was enthusiastic about supporting the decision and that we were in strong agreement. But it was important that we deliberately hear from everybody in the group, because the last person to share in that group said that they supported the decision, but it was really hard for them to support the decision. It was hard because they were aware that they were connected to lots of people who would find it hard to accept the decision, or who wouldn't understand how we could have come to that decision. And it had felt hard at the last meeting when we were discussing a similar issue, because they had felt pressure to get to agreement. They had felt like the majority of the meeting didn't want to take the time to listen and to the concerns people had, and just wanted the decision made already. But we don't actually have unity if we're just not making space for all those voices who don't agree. We can't really come to an agreement unless we hear from each other. If there's a voice that's not being heard, that leads to discouragement and resentment, bitterness. In the gospel reading, Jesus is talking about conflict within the church community and saying that we should try to talk to each other when we have conflict. And he's saying that we should be ready to listen to each other, hoping to reconcile. But Jesus has really strong words for us if we won't listen. We're not part of the church if we won't listen to each other. We're to be treated like someone outside the church. He uses the words like a Gentile or like a tax collector. Somebody who should still be treated with kindness and love, but who isn't actually part of the church because they're not listening to the rest of the church. But he's also saying something very affirming, that if we can listen to each other and come to agreement, God will honor what we've agreed. That's pretty profound. It says that what we bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever we loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. In a lot of churches that came out of the Reformation, decisions have been made by members voting. In our church, the Uniting Church in Australia, we can make decisions by voting if we can't come to agreement. But the preference is that we start by trying to find something that we can all agree on. The problem is, it can be tempting to all then just agree or to assume that we have agreement. If there's one person who disagrees or who wants to ask some questions or to contribute a possible improvement to the decision, they might just keep quiet because they're hearing a lot of agreement. But God's Spirit might be provoking that person's unrest about the decision. One of the tools that we have as a church is a set of different coloured cards that can be used in meetings, especially in big meetings, to test how people are feeling about a decision. If people are happy to support the decision that's being proposed, they can hold up an orange card to say that they're feeling warm to the decision. And if they're not in agreement, they can hold up a blue card to say that they're feeling cool to the decision. And that might be because they need to ask some questions to clarify things, or they might have suggestions about how to improve the decision that's being discussed. In a meeting, the cards make it easy to see how close we are to an agreement. Even if it's just one person who's feeling cool to the decision, we can pick that up and have the opportunity to hear from each other. See if we can actually find agreement. Otherwise, that person's voice can easily be missed in the middle of all the furious agreement, and we might miss something that God's Spirit is saying through them. In a world where often the loudest voices are heard, where the person with the biggest crowd often rules, where the strongest can trample over others, we're challenged to do something different, to try and listen to each other, finding unity by hearing each voice. God's at work creating a world where there's a place for everyone and no one is overlooked.